Hello. Good evening, everyone. Welcome back. Welcome back to our Pro E Academy class. So today, what we're going to share with you is something I think we heard quite a lot of news this year. I think mostly if you go outside and tapao, take away and buy in the sasa, so you notice that the price of the meat that you tapao, everything is increased. I heard PJ some area even increase 1 ringgit. For like Seri Kembangan area, I think it's about 50 cent at least. So that's one we want to talk about is the unavoidable inflations. Okay, actually there are two things in life you cannot run away lah. Even we are not around already. So what is the two things that we can't run away? First is the tax. The government sure will check. Okay, your estate ready, are you paying enough tax or not? Okay, the second thing is we cannot stop them to increase will be that inflations. Okay, so this is why the money that you put, the I think what we say will be purchasing power, the cash purchasing power that you have, means the cash that you have on hands or banks, actually they're getting susut nilai lah. In Malay we say getting lesser and lesser. 15 ringgit what you bought this year, another 5 or 10 years, definitely will be a lot difference. Okay, so what this will cause is it will affected in our property line, our property price. Okay, so today we're honored to invite one of our IQS seniors negotiators, whereby we know that he's very good in doing the research and know that. So today he's going to share with us what this topic. Can we put our hands together and welcome today sharing speakers, Chikan. Hi, Chikan.
Hi, Jason. Okay, episode 45. Thanks a lot for inviting me, and Happy New Year to everyone who's tuning in today lah. Okay, hope you all had a great 2021 and happy 2022 ahead moving forward. Right. So unavoidable inflation, like Jason said, you've heard a lot about it. It is a very scary topic, but then for every winner, every loser, there's always a winner lah. All right, and we will get in a little bit deeper into it today, based on on how inflation is affecting the property sector. But before we carry forward, of course, as usual, short introduction about myself. Who am I? I've been in this line since 2019, together with Jason from our previous agency together before I moved to IQI. I've been working in sales and marketing all my life, and what do you call it? I'm a graduate of media management studies lah. Okay, so what is inflation? Inflation can mean a lot of things. Some of the most basically, an inflation also means blowing up of a balloon, first definition based on Oxford Dictionary. But today we're going to look at it from an economic standpoint and how it affects our daily lives in the property sector. So we will be looking at this one: general increase in prices and fall in the purchasing value of money. Okay, so moving on. What is inflation in general? Jason kind of gave a brief description just now, but for my description, it's more because I'm not so much a mee goreng guy. I am a very much shit cha guy, or iced Chinese tea guy. I paid attention to the prices of. How I really learned about inflation is how the prices of Chinese tea, iced Chinese tea, has gone up over the years since I was a kid. Between the 1990s to the early 2000s, that's when I really first started up with the Chinese tea drinking culture. And when I started, I was in between here, between the 40 cents to 50 cents line actually. And right now we have already moved to this 80 cents line and 80 cents price line in a lot of places. So that is how I kind of started to understand the concept behind inflation. Prices will always keep going up and it won't go down. So in Malaysia, unfortunately, Chinese tea is not the number one metric for measuring inflation. So let's look at what are the metrics, what are the key indexes that the Malaysian government and authorities use to measure the amount of inflation in our country. Okay, so in Malaysia we have a consumer's price index, and this is the index that we use to measure inflation. So there's a few items put into place to use to measure how well Malaysia is doing in terms of growth and whether prices are going up or prices are going down. Generally, prices will always be on an upward trend. And some of the most important factors would be our sector, which is housing. All right. Housing on its own makes up almost 24% of the entire 100%. It's almost 1/4 of the entire index. So it's a very heavy, it's a very heavy sector in terms of, it's a very heavy factor in terms of how it affects the Malaysian economy as a whole, whether it's growing or falling. All right. Now, before I move on to the housing sector, I'm going to talk a little bit about what really causes inflation. To the layman, to the common person, a lot of the times it's the very most simplest answer would be supply and demand. But in reality, it is much more complex than that. There are a lot of factors which I will look into now. These are just some of them, in fact, some of the most common ones out there. There are few factors like cuts in interest rate, increased money supply, so the supply part, and which creates more demand, so that's the demand part. Then there are a lot of other factors such as high wages, when a country's employees are being paid more, so they can also generate more demand, creating higher prices because they'll cut off supply. Then devaluation. Malaysia is a country that likes to devalue our currency a lot because we want to lower our prices as much as possible, because we are a very strong exporting country. We want to lower our prices as much as possible. We want to lower the ringgit as much as possible so that we can sell as much as possible. But that oversupply that we create again is another factor which causes inflation through the cost push inflation, because we push our product costs down. It will tend to increase demand, and again it will increase the prices of everything else, because there will be more spending power after that. These are all interrelated to each other. Okay, and of course another thing that I think is very subjective, and also you can't really put it into numbers. Inflation by expectation. Okay, inflation expectations is basically human expectations of inflation, because our expectation on prices will always go up, whether we like it or not. We are humans. We have expectations to manage. We never want to sell anything for less than what we bought it for. There are some products which we will sell for less, but of course there are other products like assets, property assets, shares, stocks, what other assets? Digital assets. Maybe now digital currency is very popular. We will never want to sell it for less. We always want to sell it for more. Selling at a loss is always something we want to avoid. So this also causes inflation. All right. So these are just some of the examples. Okay. But most importantly today, for what causes inflation in terms of Malaysia right now, is increased money supply. We are currently stuck in this situation where our money supply has increased. I'll explain a little bit more why later on. But because of increased money supply, this will lead to devaluation, which eventually causes all sorts of reasons to a lot of prices being inflated. Okay, so moving on. How does printing more money, in Malaysia's case, cause inflation? All right, here's a very short and brief infographic just to explain. When a government starts printing more money, that means the value of the money is not worth as much anymore, because you have 10 ringgit, and like for example, Jason has 10 ringgit, but my government had decided to print more 10 ringgits into and print more 10 ringgits and throw it into the currency system in the financial system in Malaysia. So that means our 10 ringgit will be worth less because everybody has more of it, which is makes it less limited, makes it less limited edition, makes it less special in a way. So our human expectations for that value has dropped. Okay, and in order to recoup our cost, everything else has to, in order for vendors, sellers, and all the tradesmen and businessmen in between to recoup their cost through exchange or whatever not, they have to start raising their prices in order to cover, in order to meet uh, the value which they used to be getting from their previous amount lah. Okay, put it that way. So printing money is one of the main causes of Malaysia's Malaysia's inflation issues. All right, and basically devaluation in a way, and also just to give you an idea of how bad it is, based on this is Central Bank of Malaysia is basically Bank Negara lah. Okay, so based on Bank Negara's report from last year, since the beginning of January, we have literally been printing non-stop from Q1 all the way to the end of Q3. Okay, the amount of cash that we have been printing has been going upwards and upwards. There is a need for it. I'll get a little bit into it later on why. But sometimes a lot of this is also creating a lot of unnecessary debt by lowering our the value of the ringgit. Okay, this form of printing will create devaluation, which will make our cost go higher because we do not live alone. In Malaysia, we live around many neighbors: Singapore, Thailand, Indonesia, to a certain extent, Philippines, and of course Brunei. Don't forget that. So there is a lot of trade going on as more ringgit is being printed. That makes our ringgit price go lower, which makes material cost go higher, basically. Okay, so just to show you a graph, this is already scary enough, but just to show you a graph on how.
You didn't share the screen.
I'm not sharing screen.
Yes.
Oh shit. Oh shit. I'm very sorry. I'm very sorry.
I thought you were going to talk a different way this round.
Very sorry. Very sorry. Very sorry.
Okay,
I thought I did already. Okay. I thought I did.
Okay.
So we'll go back to the beginning. So okay, I kind of went through this part already.
Okay.
I went through this part already. Explain what this is. Oh my god, so sorry. Oh, so sorry. So I went through this part already. Let's just start again.
The screen you share, I think you better share the presentation slide one. You're sharing the wrong screen.
Yeah. Wait, am I sharing presentation slide?
Okay. You share again.
I'm sharing now. Is it working?
Not not this one.
No.
No. You're sharing the wrong screen. This is the slide.
Yeah. One moment. Okay, let me start again. Share screen.
You chose the screen. Yeah, I think you chose the wrong screen.
Oh, okay. Very sorry about that. Wasted about 15 minutes of your time. Okay. Oh my god.
Okay.
So sorry. The first time.
Sorry. Okay.
Okay, so
I'll pass back to you. Okay.
Okay, so unavoidable inflation. I've already explained this part. What is inflation? Yes. Sorry, I already explained this part. What is inflation? And I explained. I went through this part. So yeah, I started my inflation life here. I started understanding inflation over here when I was starting to consume a lot of Chinese tea, and this is where it's been since then till now. All right, and the Malaysian housing, how we measure Malaysia, how we measure inflation in Malaysia is through the Consumer Price Index, and housing makes up a huge sector of it, 23.8% out of the full 100%. Of course, other factors include transportation, food, non-alcoholic beverages. There are a lot of other things like commercial goods, FMCGs, and all that. But we in the housing market, we in the real estate market, we make up a good chunk of it, almost 1/4 of our progress makes up almost 1/4 of the entire measurement system in Malaysia alone. So what causes inflation? There are basically the two most basic types of inflation causes. Inflation types would be the demand pull sort of inflation and cost pull inflation, and these are all the interrelated causes. All right, and for today's topic, basically I already talked a lot about it. It's because it's due to increased money supply in the case of Malaysia, and devaluating the ringgit, and of course our own human expectations on inflation. Okay, so for today's topic, of course, I kind of explained, although you do not see this graph, but it's a graph that explains when a government starts printing more money and making your money less valuable, it becomes it is one of the core reasons behind inflation. All right, and what do you call it? And this is the rate of Malaysia's money printing in the last year from Q1 to Q3. It's been going on an up and up, and here is one of the reasons why. Okay, so this is okay. Now back to the present. Now that we've kind of recovered all of our previous explanations on inflation in Malaysia. Okay, so this is the International Monetary Fund. Basically, they are like the World Bank kind of thing. This is their coverage on inflation in Malaysia in general since the 1980s. Okay, so our baseline of 0% from before that, 1985, put it that way. Since 1985, our country has been experiencing an annual inflation rate of between 2 to 5%, so averaging 3 to 4%, that sort of rate. All right. Now, in the last years before the pandemic, of course, there was always a lot up and down, and some of our best years you'll see later on correlates very strongly with our property market, property sector. Now, this huge dip, of course, comes from the COVID-19 pandemic. This is a worldwide thing. It's not just Malaysia. Everybody experienced it here. But just to highlight to you some of the best times that we have experienced in terms of, some of the best inflation times are, of course, also some of the best economic times in Malaysia, and some of the worst times are also highlighted over here. I will now show you what some of the best times were and what some of the worst times were. All right. So, if all of you remember this time, this is 1998. Okay, this is after the 1997 global Asian economic crisis. This is when Malaysia was on the up and up, but we suddenly dipped down. But in 1998, Malaysia played host to the Commonwealth Games, and also we started our first F1 race in Malaysia. Okay, so in 1998, there was a lot going up till 1998. There was a lot of government spending going on in the country. This was during then Prime Minister Tun Dr. Mahathir's time, when he launched a lot of mega projects leading up to the Commonwealth Games. So while a lot of countries suffered like us in the 1997 economic crisis, in 1998, we enjoyed a sudden boom in our economy thanks to a lot of the activities leading up to that year in the country. But right after that, right after all the hype of the Commonwealth Games, after the what do you call it? After the what do you call it? Formula One races, then it died back down. Okay, and so that was our curve lah, of inflation in Malaysia. So inflation is not always a bad thing, right? Inflation can also be because of good things sometimes. I mean, most of the time, it's not always as bad as everybody thinks it is. There will always be winners and losers, and I'll explain a little bit further on who the winners are and how you can be a winner too. All right. So moving on, in when we started to experience rate of inflation again was somewhere around here. Okay, this was when the U.S. wanted to go to war. When the U.S. was attacked, when the September 11 terrorist attacks happened in the U.S. in 2001, was when we started to experience another small dip. Because whether we like it or not, the global market, the Malaysian market, we are heavily affected by the spending power of Americans as well. We trade a lot with America, right? As well as a lot of other countries lah. And so long as America is the top spender in the world, our power of spending will depend on their spending. Okay, so that is when they had a little bit of unrest, where human expectations were put elsewhere. That is when spending went down and we experienced a slight dip in form. But as soon as they started to go to war in 2002, that is when prices started going up again for various reasons. For Malaysia, number one would be because price of oil. We are we are a country that has a lot of natural resources to export, and one of our strongest would be oil. Okay, so that aside, our next biggest boom outside of the war, outside of all of that, came around this time period. And later on, you will see that this is also the time period that was one of the best times for the property market in Malaysia. Okay, so moving on to the property sector, now you see the slight the correlation between how the property sector is why the property sector is such an important part of the part of the entire Malaysian inflation index, because it is very similar. Outside of import and export, in Malaysia, the number one local domestic product for judgment is still property. It is the most valuable product that we sell in the country to our own locals, all right, and of course to investors outside of Malaysia, because the next best thing that we can sell, which would be human talent, is usually exported outside. All right, so yeah, looking back at the previous graph, this was where is 1997. 1997 was here, right? So you see the huge dip. After 1997 came, when the global economic crisis came, nobody could afford anything. That was when we experienced deflation. That was when our money, as strong as it was back then, everything else became too expensive. That is when we started printing money. I mean, that is cases of when we started printing money, and when we started hosting huge events. That is how in 1998, after 1998, because there was a lot of interest being brought into Malaysia, that is how the prices of housing basically went up. Okay, so then after that we went through a slight recovery phase where it was very boring, and then a small mid dip, where back in this time what happened was between 2008 and 2010, what the government did to curb another deflation process was the government removed the RPGT. So that means the government did not charge you property tax for your second-hand property if you sold. All right. So this is when housing in a way became more affordable to sell, much more worthy to sell. So people just started selling, which created a surge in demand. Next thing was, in between that period, because of this surge in demand, during this time, this was the heydays of the property market in Malaysia. I was not a part of it back then, unfortunately. Jason was. He made a lot of money selling. So, what do you call it? This was when this is the very peak of it, lah, which you can also see. This is 2012. Which you can also see is around when around when our inflation periods in Malaysia was at one of its highest peaks. It will always go up and go down, but this was some of the best times in the country during the good time in the property market also. Okay, so right now we are, of course, this is the future, but of course we are here right now. Right, we are stuck at around 2%. Currently we are recovering, and this ends at 2019. But our property market, if you want to look at it in graph form, is currently following this trend. It's slightly upwards, but then it is plateauing. Okay, and some of the additional reasons behind why this is the case is because, like I mentioned earlier, in order to go through a lot of hardship and recovery, sometimes what you need is just more cash. Okay, so this was the time when last year when our government just started printing a lot more cash. This is about a 3.5% difference in terms of growth and loss. In order to recover from that losses, sometimes we have no choice. We just have to print to give out. Okay, which was a lot of what basically the government did last year during the first year of the COVID-19 pandemic. They gave out money, just as it is. Of course, a lot of it was taken from our very own savings, but it was just not enough. So they just gave out money. They stopped spending. They just gave, and when they stopped spending, they also stopped earning, which sometimes you have to create inflation in order to curb deflation, to increase spending power in the country, to get out of such a bad cycle. Okay, so this is what happened from last year till this year. This is when around this time, Chinese New Year, is when we started to experience a dip because of the COVID-19 pandemic. People started to get scared, and when the situation really got worse was around during the first 2 to 3 months of the COVID-19 pandemic, when we experienced our very first MCO, when everybody was very unsure. The whole world was unsure. It was not just Malaysia. This graph that you can see outside of this part is very similar in all other countries around the world, because the world has never experienced, or rather this generation has never experienced such a situation before. Before World War II, during the 1930s and 1940s, there was another pandemic called the Spanish flu. It was not just in Spain, it was just being reported by the Spanish because the Spanish was neutral throughout World War II, so they gave very good coverage of it. So that's why they just call it Spanish flu. But it was also a global pandemic that, of course, back then transportation was not as easy, so it did not spread as easily as COVID-19. But basically, our current generation has never experienced something as terrible as that before. That is why in the entire housing market, this is basically the housing demand graph between 2020 to middle of last year, beginning of 2020 to the middle of last year. This is the housing demand graph. Okay, so we not experienced something as terrible as that before. So what the Malaysian government did was they brought back HOC. This time 2020 to 2021. All right. So with the re-announcement of HOC, the Home Ownership Campaign, that started to generate a buzz in the Malaysian property demand market, which is when when Malaysians started searching for property again. Okay, and this is a report by I did not put the source here, but this is actually through the National Housing Ministries report. So basically, this this sort of campaigns that the government puts in place, which creates necessary inflation, shows that between then to now, between beginning of 2020, of course, there was the pandemic and shopping slows down during Chinese New Year, during festive seasons in general. It's not just Chinese New Year, but just so happens this time is Chinese New Year. During festive season, shopping tends to slow down because, of course, we are busy doing our festive stuff. So between the festive season till then, actually there has been a growth in terms of search and demand for property in Malaysia. Okay, so sometimes inflation is necessary. It's unavoidable, but it is necessary in terms of maintaining the national economy, especially in Malaysia, which 1/4 of it depends on the housing and property market. Okay, so with that, of course, I've mentioned a lot of the hardship and a lot of how inflation has caused, of course, some pain, and of course, we kind of understand how inflation will raise prices. It is unavoidable, like Jason mentioned, but in every loser, there is always a winner. Okay, so now we kind of talked about the losers already. We did not talk about these guys as much, all right? Because we talked a lot about the whole economy, and of course, I talked a lot about import and export, right? That is not our sector. Our sector is real estate property. So for today, we are going to talk about how you can be a winner if you are investing in property in Malaysia while experiencing inflation. Okay, prices are never going to go down. So what are the things that you can save money on if you are like right now times are bad due to inflation and the government trying to get out of it? Due to overinflation, and now we are in a depression stage and government is trying to get out of it. What does the government do in order to curb it? So what the government did last year was, of course, they literally gave away a lot of money. They cut the amount of money that they were taking from the people through taxes, because the HOC is basically a tax-free way for you to make your home purchase. All right. So they stopped taxing home sales. Then the next thing is they cut off they had a cut-off period for repaying home loans and a lot of other loans. So if you are on, say, a fixed repayment plan, last year to this year, the year before that to last year is 2022 already. Sorry, I'm still in 2021 mode. To last year to still right now, this year a little bit. I do not know when it's going to change. Interest rates are very low. It was a very good time for people to buy whatever they can with fixed interest rates. All right, because the price of, let's say, if you're purchasing a property, commercial or residential, doesn't matter. Your home, your property, whatever value you purchase it at, will always be fixed. Okay, but then the interest repayments for your mortgage may fluctuate based on whatever the current economic situation is and whatever the National Bank sets it at. All right, I've covered this a few months ago in one of my previous topics about reporting about the changes of interest interest measurement systems in Malaysia, interest index systems in Malaysia. So If you are purchasing right now, it is a very good time because interest rates are very low. Okay, to begin with, if you are able to get a very good package deal with whichever bank that you apply with at a very low rate, it will maintain throughout the entire loan period. Okay, but and next thing is important to us would be owners of land and physical assets. Physical assets, in our case, such as property. Okay, because whether the country is going through good times or bad times. Bad times could be inflation also. Good times, we could also experience inflation. It doesn't matter. Inflation will always be there. That means whatever assets that we have, the value will always go up. All right. So I'm going to pinch a little bit moving forward on how inflation can help us property owners from some of my previous slides. Very simply, this is an order index. Sorry. This is an older index okay, annual inflation of 4%. We are no longer there, but this is just an example of how inflation can help us if we compound our inflation based on, if we compound our rental rates based on the inflation rates, right? So in general, if you have purchased a fixed asset now and you are able to let it out, of course, during the first few years, it will not be as good, and you might not be able to cover your fixed repayment plan or flexible repayment plan. Okay, but then again, like I mentioned way earlier, one of the factors that causes inflation is human expectation, human demand. Basically, we do not ever want to settle for less if we do not have to. We do not want to sell at a loss if we do not want to. If we have the demand, we will always want to increase whatever yield we can make from whatever asset that we have. Okay? And in order to counter the expensive costs now, we as property owners will also have to rely on our unfriendly but sometimes friendly phrase that is inflation, because using inflation alone, I can increase my property rental yield year on year. Okay, so within 10 years, I can go up in total up to 1.3% in rental yield. All right, so this is just the rental market. Of course, it also helps with the resale value of property. Now, again, taking back from one of my very early presentations, if any of you remember when I was trying to share with you on investing in affordable housing, all right? This was an actual report on the prices. These are all the transactions made. This is an actual report on the valuation and prices of transactions made on affordable housing in Petaling Jaya, which is the region which I focus on heavily and have talked about heavily in the past. In the last 10 years alone, basically, prices have doubled. And this is through the compounding effects of inflation. You can look at the transactions made here. Prices are always on an upward trend, going up. Valuation, the yellow line is actually the yellow line is trend line, but you can look at a trend line that it is always on the upward movement. It's always on upward movement. Okay, so basically that is a quick explanation on inflation tonight, and also on how inflation has affected people, how government policies during tough times can purposely cause inflation to affect people, and also how, as a property owner, you can benefit from it. All right. So inflation is going to be there, whether you like it or not, because of human expectations, because of fiscal irresponsibility through central bank or whatever not, and through supply and demand and many other causes that sometimes is beyond government control, like pandemic, viral pandemic, okay, virus pandemic. So whether we like it or not, inflation will be there. Okay, but how you can benefit from as a property owner, I have to share with you, which is also why when you ask a property agent, it is the best time to buy, we will always tell you now is the best time to buy, because whether you like it or not, prices will eventually always go up. You cannot turn back time, and now is going to be the cheapest time that you can buy it compared to the future. All right, maybe in the future, 6 months down the road, you might be able to get in something at a better price in terms of a project, because there are better recompensation packages from the developer, or maybe you're able to negotiate a slightly better price from the landowner if you're buying housing from the secondary market, the sub-sale market. Okay, but in general, as Malaysia continues to develop, as land becomes more scarce, prices that will create a higher demand that will be able to give owners a stronger command of their prices also. So prices will always go up. When is the best time to buy? Now is always the best time to buy. All right. So we hope to be able to further serve you in the property sector outside of sharing topics like this with you. We hope to be able to find you the right thing to buy now that suits your needs. Okay. Thanks a lot. I will now hand my time back to Jason. Hello, Jason.
Yes, hello. Okay. Thank you very much, Chicken, for the sharings for this. I think most of the people, you can see just now, Chicken been repeating the same when is the best time. Okay, of course, now is the best time. Eventually, if you have, I think your income that you're already quite stable, so you have some saving and things like that, it's always the best time, because the best time to buy is when you are ready to purchase it. Just as Chicken said, the pricing in the future definitely will become higher. What worse will be, the size of the property will become smaller, definitely. Okay, so if you want to buy a bigger size, bigger house, to enjoy more rooms and things like that, yeah, now is a very, very good time. So because since I think pandemic and things like that, I think the housing price is been quite a bottom line for this couple of 3 years. So actually they will not stand from there for so long. So you can see the up purchasing, just like Jian said, I think that is the last year, right? The affordable house, the pricing has been double up, and you can see that is going to be more. Okay, so thank you everyone for coming tonight. If you like our course, so why not you help us to share out the videos so that more people can know and understand about this inflation. Is it very affected our property price? Okay, so thank you everyone for coming tonight. If no questions, then we will call it a day. And thank you, Chicken, for the times. So remember, you comment the PRO in our comment section, then you will get our ebook for tonight. Okay, thank you everyone. Good night. Stay tuned for next week. Bye.
Bye bye.